Amy DeWitt. I am the pastry chef instructor here at the Culinary School of the Rockies. I teach students who want to become pastry chefs how to make all the various confections. And we get students who come from all over the country and they usually have to make some adjustments for altitude. A lot of you who live in the Rocky Mountain region have come from sea level areas and have found that baking can be quite problematic, or at least some challenges will arise. The nice thing about cooking with sugar is that we actually have an advantage being at higher elevation because we don't have the humidity here. So if you have been confounded with all of the trials and tribulations of baking at altitude, you're going to be quite pleased with cooking with sugar at altitude. Level, the various stages of sugar cookery, you would have to actually deduct 1 degree Fahrenheit temperature for every 500 feet up in elevation you go. So here in Boulder, we're roughly 5,000 feet, so we take 10 degrees off of all of the stages of sugar cookery. So if, for instance, today we're going to be bringing our sugar to hardball stage for the divinity that we're going to make, and that normally would be cooked to about 260 degrees. We're going to cook it to about 250 degrees. So let's talk about what we're going to make today. We're going to make divinity, and we are going to make caramel. So those are two very basic kinds of confections that we make with cooked sugar. One is a meringue-based or an Italian meringue-based product, that's the divinity. And the other is a very simple caramel where we just cook sugar until it reaches the caramel stage, and then we add cream and butter. Yes, there are lots of calories and cholesterol in it. That's what makes it so good. And then we continue cooking it a little longer so that it gets to just the right stage of chewiness so that it doesn't take off your dentifrice. I have had chefs who have lost fillings to it, but we'll make it nice and chewy. To make a Hawaiian sea salt caramel because it's pretty. I'm going to show you actually what the Hawaiian sea salt looks like. It's kind of pink, so it's very nice and Christmassy, and it's delicious. It has some minerals in it that give it that color and just gives it a nice little smoky flavor. All right, so I'm going to start cooking my sugar with some corn syrup. Corn syrup is what's known in the biz as an invert sugar. It basically just means that the sugar molecules have inverted their rotational pattern, and it helps prevent crystallization. That's what really you'd want to know about an invert sugar. So you can stir your sugar up until the point where it's melted, and then you don't want to stir it anymore. Once it starts to cook down, I'm going to clean up the sides of the pot with a pastry brush and cold water. So I have a little bit of sugar on the sides of the pot. So what I do is I just take the pastry brush and make sure it's clean. You don't want, if you've used this for a rotisserie chicken and you've been basting with it, make sure you get all that nasty junk off because you don't want your divinity or your caramel to taste like garlic. Also, you'll end up adding impurities and you'll get a lot of crystallization. So I'm just going to clean down the sides a little bit so I don't get crystals forming. Crystal is sugar is a crystal. So if you know anything about, if you've ever seen those films in chemistry class, how once you start forming crystals, you get a contagion. They just form a contagion of crystals naturally, and then you'd end up with rock candy instead of something smooth and fine textured. You really want a nice silky texture for your confection. So every time you wash down the sides of the pot, you're adding water. When you cook sugar, you want any water that you have in there to evaporate away because it's not going to actually start cooking until there's no moisture left in there. So you don't want to be too liberal. You don't want to let your sugar crystallize, but you also don't want to be overly liberal with your water, or it's just going to take longer to reach the various stages. I'm going to cook this for my caramels to roughly about somewhere between 310 to 350 degrees. I'm really going more for color. I wanted to get a nice caramel color to it. So I'm going to use a thermometer. I don't use the candy thermometers. They have to sit in the pot and it's harder to wash around them, and that's where you're likely to get some problems with crystallization. But if you can get one of these instant read thermometers pretty much at any any kitchen store or any store that has a kitchen department. Let's see if I can turn this on. Yes, you can. Excellent. If you stick it through a slotted spoon, you're not likely to lose it into the gunk. But if you try and hold it just like this, first of all, it's very hot. Second of all, you'll probably drop it and then you'll ruin the sugar. So I'm just going to get a quick read. I know it's not anywhere near ready because I can see that some of the sugar hasn't even dissolved yet. But just so you get kind of an idea, it's right at about 210, 215 it's going up to. Before it starts to get any color, it's going to be 300 degrees. So you really don't have to sit here married to the sugar pot with a thermometer. You can go by sight for this, for caramel. When we make divinity, some cream boiling meanwhile. So what's going to happen when this gets a nice caramel color, I'm going to add in about an ounce of butter and I'm going to add in a pound of cream, but I don't want the cream to be cold or when I add it it's just going to explode all over the place. So this is, remember, going to be, you know, like 350 degrees. That's pretty screaming hot. So I'm going to make sure this is hot and just let it be ready for me. Turn this down. So it can actually get a little more. It can go from the right color to burnt in, you know, about 5 seconds. It's a good idea to always have an ice bath when you're working with sugar in case of body burns, which happen, and also so that you can shock the sugar. If it gets too hot, you can just take the whole pot and stick it in the bowl of ice so that it stops it from cooking further. Right now it's about 340. It's getting close to 350. And I'm happy with this color, so I'm going to let it. I just added the butter. You can see it doesn't spit at me too much right now, but when I add the cream, it will. So I just mix that in really good. Cream is nice and hot, and I'm just going to add this in a slow stream. It doesn't even have to be steady. I'm going to kind of let the caramel tell me how much I can add, how quickly. Watch this, it's just going to come right up. Like a little witch's cauldron. Just want to get it nice and incorporated. Kind of coax this cream into it because it's already pretty solid even though it's molten right now. So I don't want to just add the cream and not stir it in. I want to get it really nicely incorporated. Even that hot coil, I'm going to add a little bit of vanilla paste. This is something that we buy in the industry. You can get it at Savory Spice specialty stores, places like that. It has a little bit of the bean actually in the extract, so it's a little thicker, you'll notice, but what's nice is it actually will leave a little bit of the bean speckled throughout, which I love. I'm also going to put in a little bit of the salt because I like sweet and salty together, and it's really nice. Plus we'll use some for garnish on top. At home, if you don't have a silpat, these things are wonderful in the biz. You can actually bake up to 500 degrees in these, and they're non-stick. So I always use one of these. But you can use wax paper, you can use tin foil that you oil. You should also oil your pan because some of it, you'll see, some of it's gonna spill out a little bit. But once it gets solid, it's pretty easy to remove. Once the caramel gets solid, I'm talking about. Let's pour all this yumminess out here. If you have a silpat, you can coax it into the shape you want it, or you can just use the right size pan to start out with. But this is the pan I have available. And now you can see it's kind of standing out in the corners, but it will all, it's still pretty liquid, so it will all come into a nice shape. Mix this up and dip it in chocolate and garnish it with some of that Hawaiian sea salt. Okay.